She wasn't supposed to see it. The broken wagon sat at the edge of the property like a forgotten graveyard, and the old chestnut horse stood motionless in front of it, staring into nothing. Just staring, day after day, refusing to move. Most people would have walked past. Most people would have turned away from an abandoned animal on an abandoned piece of land. But when Margaret Holloway stepped out of her truck that morning with plans to clear the overgrown property she'd just inherited, something in the way that horse was looking at the wagon made her stop, made her really look. And what she found hidden inside those rotting wooden slats would unravel a 20-year-old secret that nobody in town had ever dared to speak about. The horse had not moved in 3 days, not once, not to drink water, not to eat, not even to shift its weight from one leg to the other. It stood in the middle of the broken yard like a statue made of flesh and bone, staring at the destroyed wagon 20 feet away. And nobody, not the neighbors who passed by, not the farmers who lived miles around, not even the man who owned the property before he died. Nobody could explain why. Margaret Holloway stood next to her old pickup truck on that hot August morning, watching the horse. She had come to this property to clean it up, to decide what to do with the land she had just inherited from a great uncle she had never even met. She had no idea that the first thing she would see when she arrived would change everything about her life, and about her family's history, forever. The sun was climbing high in the sky. The heat was already making the air look wavy and blurry above the ground. Not a single cloud moved across the blue sky. The whole world seemed to be standing still, just like the horse was standing still. Even the wind had stopped moving. The air felt thick and heavy like the world was holding its breath. Margaret walked slowly toward the animal. She had grown up around horses. Her father had taught her to ride when she was 6 years old. She knew how horses think. She knew how horses feel. And she knew that this was not normal. No healthy horse stands completely still for 3 days. No horse ignores water and food. No horse stares at something with such deep, sad concentration. The horse was a dark reddish-brown color. Once, probably many years ago, it must have been beautiful. Now, the horse's coat was covered with dust and dirt. The color looked almost gray from all the dust that had settled on the animal's body. When Margaret got closer, she could see that the horse was very, very thin. The horse's ribs were showing clearly through the skin. The horse's hip bones stuck out like sharp points. When the horse breathed, Margaret could see each breath move the thin body up and down. "Oh no," Margaret whispered when she saw the cut on the horse's back leg. The cut was long and deep. It had been there for a very long time. Margaret could tell because the wound had started to get infected. The skin around the cut was swollen and red and angry looking. Flies were buzzing around the wound, landing and taking off again. The smell of infection was strong. This horse was in pain. This horse was sick. This horse should probably be dead already, but somehow it was still standing, still breathing, still staring at that broken wagon. Margaret looked around the property. There was no barn that was safe to use. The barn had big holes in the roof and the wooden beams were falling apart. There were no water troughs anywhere. There were no signs that anyone had cared for this horse in years. The fence was broken in so many places that Margaret could not even count them all. The grass was dead. The whole place looked like nobody had lived here for a very, very long time. And yet the horse was still here, still standing, still waiting, still looking at that wagon. The wagon itself was a terrible sight. It was the kind of old wooden cart that farmers used maybe 50 or 60 years ago to carry hay or grain or other farm things. All the paint was gone. The wood was gray and broken and splintered. One of the wheels was missing completely. The wagon was tilted to one side because it did not have all 4 wheels to balance it. The whole thing looked like it might fall apart if anyone touched it. But the horse kept looking at it. The horse did not look at Margaret. The horse did not look at the sky or the ground. The horse only looked at the wagon. Every few minutes, Margaret noticed the horse would take one small step forward toward the wagon. Then the horse would stop. Then the horse would look sad. Then the horse would step a little bit closer. Then stop again. It was like the horse wanted to reach the wagon very badly, but something was making it afraid. Something was holding it back. Margaret went back to her truck and called a veterinarian that her father had used many years ago. The veterinarian's name was Dr. Patterson. He was very old now, but he still worked 3 days a week. When Margaret told him about the horse and the infected cut, Dr. Patterson asked only one question. "Margaret, do you know who owns this horse?" "I think it belongs to my great-uncle," Margaret said. "This is his property, but it looks like nobody has lived here for years." There was a long, quiet moment on the phone. Then Dr. Patterson said something very strange. "Be careful with that horse, Margaret. I think there is more to this animal than you can see with your eyes." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. "What do you mean there is more?" But Dr. Patterson did not answer her question. He just said he would come to the property that afternoon, and that she should try to give the horse water and let it know that help was coming. Margaret spent the next 2 hours carrying water from the old well. The well still worked, which was good. She filled a bucket with cool water and carried it to the horse. The horse did not drink at first. The horse just looked at the water like the horse was not sure if it should drink or not. But slowly, thirst won. The horse lowered its head and drank the entire bucket in one long pull. Then the horse looked back at the wagon again. Margaret noticed something. Every time the horse drank or ate or did anything, it always looked back at the wagon right after. It was like the horse was checking to make sure the wagon was still there. It was like the horse was afraid that the wagon might move or disappear or change into something else. Margaret sat down on the hood of her truck and watched the horse. She watched the way the horse's ribs moved in and out with each breath. She watched the way the horse's legs trembled from weakness. She watched the way the horse's eyes kept moving back to that broken wagon. And Margaret realized that she was not just looking at a horse that was sick or hungry or hurt. She was looking at a horse that was heartbroken. She was looking at a horse that was grieving something. She was looking at a horse that was waiting for something that would never come. When Dr. Patterson arrived that afternoon, his old truck made a big cloud of dust as it pulled into the yard. The veterinarian was very old, but he moved carefully and with purpose. He took one look at the horse and his face changed. Something happened in his expression. Margaret could not describe it exactly, but it was like he recognized the horse. It was like he knew something about this animal that nobody else knew. Dr. Patterson walked straight to the horse without saying hello to Margaret. He started examining the horse gently, running his old hands along the horse's ribs and legs. And while he worked, he whispered to the horse softly. "Well, girl," he said in a quiet voice. "Still here, are you? Still waiting? Still watching over her?" Margaret's breath caught. Over who? Watching over what? Dr. Patterson worked on the infected cut for a long time. He cleaned the wound very carefully. He put medicine on it. He wrapped it in clean bandages. The horse did not move, did not cry out, did not protest. The horse just stood there, completely still, while the old veterinarian worked. But the horse's eyes never left the wagon. Not once. Not for a single moment. When Dr. Patterson finally finished, he turned to Margaret. His face was serious and sad at the same time.
"This horse," he said slowly, "should not be alive. The infection is very bad. The hunger is very bad. The horse should have died already. But this horse is alive because this horse has a reason to survive. This horse is alive because this horse has something to protect. This horse is alive because this horse is still keeping a promise that was made a long, long time ago." "What promise?" Margaret asked. "What is the horse protecting?" Dr. Patterson looked at the broken wagon. He looked at the horse. Then he looked at Margaret. "I think," he said very slowly, "that you need to look inside that wagon, Margaret. I think that is what your great-uncle did. I think that is why he kept this horse. And I think when you find out what is in there, you will understand why this horse has spent its entire life standing guard." Margaret did not sleep that night. She lay in her truck bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Dr. Patterson had said. What promise was the horse keeping? What was the horse protecting? The questions would not leave her mind. They kept spinning and spinning like a wheel that could not stop. When the sun came up the next morning, Margaret made a decision. She was going to open that wagon. She was going to find out what was inside. She could not wait anymore. The mystery was eating at her like fire eating wood. She walked out to the wagon in the early morning light. The sun was just starting to rise, turning the sky pink and orange. The air was cool and fresh. The horse was still in the same place, still in the same position. The horse did not even look at Margaret as she walked past. The horse's eyes were fixed on the wagon, just like they always were. Margaret approached the wagon slowly. She was not sure what she was going to find. The wood was so old and broken that it crumbled at her touch. As she got closer, she could see that something was wrapped inside the wagon bed. Something was covered with old, thin material that used to be white, but was now brown and gray with age and dirt. Margaret reached toward the wagon. Her hands were shaking. She did not know why she was so nervous. It was just an old wagon. It was just some old things that somebody had left there. But something inside her knew that this was important. Something inside her knew that whatever was inside this wagon was going to change everything. The old covering material fell apart as soon as Margaret touched it. It turned into dust and pieces that fell to the ground. And what Margaret saw underneath made her stop breathing. It was a doll. A child's doll made of smooth white material with a painted face. The doll had real hair on its head. The doll was wearing a dress that was once white, but was now the color of old cream. The doll's face was beautiful in a sad way. The doll's eyes were painted open, looking at nothing, looking at forever. Margaret's breath came back, but it came in short, sharp gasps. Around the doll were other things. A small wooden horse toy, small enough to fit in a child's hand. A leather book that was old and worn and warped from being outside in the weather for so long. A blanket made by hand, with stitches that showed someone had loved making it. Small, careful stitches. And photographs. Many photographs in a leather folder, all of them old, all of them faded from the sun and the time. Margaret picked up the leather book with shaking hands. The pages were stiff and hard. The ink was faded but still readable. On the first page, someone had written a name in careful, beautiful handwriting. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1950 to 1952. And below the name, one sentence. My daughter's memory. Forever. Margaret's knees became weak. She sat down right there on the ground next to the wagon. A daughter. Someone's little daughter. Someone had lost a little daughter. And they had left the doll, the toys, and the blanket and the pictures here. They had left them in this wagon, outside in the weather, where the rain could fall and the sun could beat down and the wind could blow. Why would someone do that? She opened the photograph album with very careful hands. The first photographs showed a man and a woman standing together. The woman was smiling and very beautiful. The woman was going to have a baby. You could see the baby growing inside her in the pictures. Then there were pictures of a little girl with golden hair. The little girl had a smile just like the mother's smile. The little girl was playing with the doll. The little girl was sitting on a pony. The little girl was laughing. And then the pictures changed. The last photograph showed a small wooden box, a coffin, and standing next to it was the woman, but the woman was different now. The woman was not smiling. The woman's face looked like it had been broken. The woman's eyes looked like all the life had left them. The woman was looking at the coffin where her daughter was inside, and the pain on the woman's face was so strong that Margaret had to look away. She turned back to the horse. Grace was still standing exactly where she had been standing, still looking at the wagon, still keeping her vigil. And Margaret suddenly understood something that made her tears come. The horse was not just looking at the wagon. The horse was standing guard over this child. This child named Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, who had lived only 2 years. This child who had been loved so much. This child who was gone. Margaret used her phone to call the veterinarian again. Dr. Patterson, she said, her voice shaking. I opened the wagon. I found things. A doll. A blanket. A book. And the name Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Do you know about her? There was a very long silence. Yes, Dr. Patterson said finally. His voice was very quiet. Yes, I know about Sarah. Tell me, Margaret said. Please tell me everything. Not over the phone, Dr. Patterson said. You need to talk to someone else. You need to call the newspaper office. Ask for Harold Chun. Tell him what you found. Tell him about the wagon. He will know what to do. Margaret called the newspaper office. The person who answered the phone said that Harold Chun was very old now and came in only on Wednesdays. Margaret explained that it was urgent. She said she had found something important. She said it was about the Mitchell family. The person on the phone got very quiet. Then they said they would get Mr. Chun. When Harold Chun came on the phone, Margaret told him everything. She told him about the wagon. She told him about the doll and the blanket and the book. She told him about the name Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1950 to 1952. She told him about the horse that stood guard. Harold Chunt did not speak for a very long time. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked. His voice was very old and very sad. "At a property I just inherited," Margaret said. "A property that belonged to my great-uncle Robert Holloway." Harold Chunt made a sound like something had hit him in the chest. "Robert Holloway," he whispered. "That explains everything. That explains why he disappeared from town. That explains why he never spoke about what happened. That explains the horse." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. "What horse? What are you talking about?" "The horse," Harold said. "The original horse. The horse that was there when Sarah died. The horse that stood over her body for hours. The horse that nobody could move. Until your great-uncle came." Margaret felt something cold move down her spine. "Sarah died?" she asked. "What do you mean she died? How did she die?" Harold Chunt took a very long breath. "That's the question nobody in this town would answer for 70 years, he said. "But yes, Sarah Mitchell died on your property in 1952. And the truth about how she died, the real truth, is a secret that your family has been keeping ever since." "What secret?" Margaret asked. "What really happened?" "You need to come to my office," Harold said. "Tomorrow, if you can. Bring the doll. Bring the photographs. Bring everything you found in that wagon. There's a story here that needs to be told. A story that a horse has been keeping alive all this time. A story that someone has to finally tell." When Margaret hung up the phone, she looked back at the wagon. She looked at the things scattered across its broken bed. A doll, a blanket, a book, a set of photographs of a child who had lived only 2 years. And she looked at Grace, still standing, still watching, still keeping the vigil that had lasted for 70 years. Margaret understood now that she was not the first person to inherit this secret. Her great-uncle Robert had carried it his entire life. And now, somehow, it had fallen to her to uncover it, to tell it, to make sure that Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell would not be forgotten. As the sun moved across the sky and the day grew old, Margaret carefully collected every single item from the wagon. The doll, the toy horse, the blanket, the photographs, the book. She held them carefully, like they were made of glass, like they might break if she was not gentle. And behind her, the horse finally looked away from the wagon. For the first time in years, the horse looked at Margaret, and the horse followed her. Margaret walked into the newspaper office carrying the doll, the blanket, the toy horse, and the photographs. Harold Chunt was sitting at an old desk in the back of the empty office. He was a very old man now, with white hair and glasses that made his eyes look bigger than they really were. When he saw Margaret walk in, he stood up very slowly, like his bones hurt. But when he saw the doll in Margaret's hands, he sat back down, hard, like someone had pushed him. "I thought I would never see those things again," he said very quietly. "I thought they would stay hidden forever." Margaret set everything on the desk in front of him. The old man looked at the doll for a long time without touching it. His hands were shaking. "Sit down," he said finally. "You need to hear the story. The real story. The story that this town has been hiding for 70 years. Margaret sat in the chair across from him. She waited. She did not say anything. She knew that Harold needed to tell this in his own way, at his own speed. In 1950, Harold began, a family came to this area. The family's name was Mitchell. The father was named Thomas Mitchell. He was a horse trader. He was a good trader, people said. He was fair. He was honest. But he had secrets. Bad secrets. Harold paused. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes like they hurt. The mother's name was Eleanor. Eleanor came from money. Her family had power in this county. Lots of power. Lots of influence. Eleanor loved her husband very much. She trusted him completely. She would have believed anything he told her. Margaret felt her stomach getting tight. She knew something bad was coming. They had a daughter, Harold continued. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. The little girl was beautiful and healthy and loved. Everyone in town knew that Eleanor loved that child more than anything in the world, more than her own life. Harold stopped. He looked out the window at the street outside. One morning in 1952, something happened, he said. An accident, people said. A terrible accident. The official story was that Sarah wandered away from the house. She went toward where the horses were. One of the horses got scared and reared up. The wagon shifted. The child was caught under the wagon. The child died. But, Margaret said, that's not the real story. No, Harold said. That is not the real story. He stood up slowly and walked to an old filing cabinet in the corner of the office. He pulled out a file that was very thick and very old. Dust came off the file when he pulled it out. He came back to the desk and opened the file. Inside were old newspaper clippings, old police reports, old photographs. He spread them out slowly. There was a young man working for Thomas Mitchell, Harold said. The boy was only 18 years old. His name was James Whitmore. James was told to watch Sarah that morning while Eleanor was working in the house. But Thomas told James to go do something else. Thomas told James to leave. And James went. Margaret could not breathe. When James came back 30 minutes later, he found Eleanor screaming. Harold continued. He found Sarah under the wagon. But here is what James told the police. He told them that he saw something very wrong. He told them that Sarah's dress was torn in a way that did not match what a wagon wheel would do. He told them that Thomas was coming out of the yard very quickly. He told them that Thomas's clothes were torn and dirty. He told them that Thomas's hands were dirty and scratched. Harold looked directly at Margaret. James told the police that he thought Thomas Mitchell had done something to his daughter. Something terrible. Something that an accident would not explain. Margaret felt like she was going to be sick. But she did not look away from Harold. Thomas Mitchell's family were powerful people, Harold said. They had money. They had lawyers. They had influence. Within days, James Whitmore's story was destroyed. People said he was lying. People said he was confused. People said he was trying to make trouble. Thomas Mitchell's lawyers said that the boy wanted attention. They said that the boy wanted money. They made James Whitmore into a liar. What happened to James? Margaret asked. He left town, Harold said. He was only 18 years old, and he had told the truth, and nobody believed him. So he left. He went to Oregon. He tried to forget. He tried to start a new life. But I knew, Margaret. Everyone in this town knew. We all knew. And we all said nothing. Harold's voice became very angry and very sad at the same time. We said nothing because the Mitchell family was powerful. We said nothing because Eleanor Mitchell was suffering so much that nobody wanted to hurt her more. We said nothing because it was easier to believe that it was an accident. We said nothing because if we spoke, we would have had to admit that a child died because of what a man did. And we did not want to live in a world where that was true. Margaret looked down at the doll sitting on the desk. But someone knew the truth, she said quietly. Someone believed James. Yes, Harold said. Your great-uncle Robert Holloway believed James. Robert was not from a rich family. Robert did not care about power or influence. Robert cared about justice. Robert hired a private person to investigate what really happened. That private person found proof. Evidence. But Robert never told anyone. Robert kept it secret. Why? Margaret asked. Why didn't he tell? Because by that time, Eleanor Mitchell was already breaking apart, Harold said. The woman was dying from grief. She was dying from the loss of her child. If Robert had revealed the truth about Thomas, it would have destroyed Eleanor too. So Robert did the only thing he could do. He bought the original horse that was there that day. The horse that stood over Sarah's body. The horse that nobody could move. And he kept that horse. And he maintained the wagon. And he kept the secret. Margaret suddenly understood. The horse, she said. The horse was a witness. Yes, Harold said. The horse was there when it happened. The horse saw what happened. The horse would not move. The horse stood over the child like it was protecting her, even though it was too late. Your great-uncle kept that horse alive because it was the only witness that mattered. It was the only one that knew the truth and could not be bought or threatened into silence. And now I have to decide what to do, Margaret said. Harold nodded. You have to decide. Do you tell the truth 70 years later and hurt the people who are still alive who are connected to the Mitchell family? Do you expose a crime that happened before most people in this town were even born? Or do you let it stay hidden, like it has been hidden? Margaret looked at the doll again. She looked at the photographs. She looked at the name written on the book, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1950 to 1952. I have to know the rest, she said. I have to know what James saw. I need to hear it directly from him. Harold smiled a very sad smile. I thought you might say that, he said. I have an address. James Whitmore is still alive. He is very old now. He lives in Oregon. And I think he has been waiting 70 years for someone to ask him to tell the truth.
We said nothing because the Mitchell family was powerful. We said nothing because Eleanor Mitchell was suffering so much that nobody wanted to hurt her more. We said nothing because it was easier to believe that it was an accident. We said nothing because if we spoke, we would have had to admit that a child died because of what a man did. And we did not want to live in a world where that was true. Margaret looked down at the doll sitting on the desk. But someone knew the truth, she said quietly. Someone believed James. Yes, Harold said. Your great-uncle Robert Holloway believed James. Robert was not from a rich family. Robert did not care about power or influence. Robert cared about justice. Robert hired a private person to investigate what really happened. That private person found proof, evidence. But Robert never told anyone. Robert kept it secret. Why? Margaret asked. Why didn't he tell? Because by that time, Eleanor Mitchell was already breaking apart, Harold said. The woman was dying from grief. She was dying from the loss of her child. If Robert had revealed the truth about Thomas, it would have destroyed Eleanor too. So Robert did the only thing he could do. He bought the original horse that was there that day. The horse that stood over Sarah's body. The horse that nobody could move. And he kept that horse. And he maintained the wagon. And he kept the secret. Margaret suddenly understood. The horse, she said. The horse was a witness. Yes, Harold said. The horse was there when it happened. The horse saw what happened. The horse would not move. The horse stood over the child like it was protecting her, even though it was too late. Your great-uncle kept that horse alive because it was the only witness that mattered. It was the only one that knew the truth and could not be bought or threatened into silence. And now I have to decide what to do, Margaret said. Harold nodded. You have to decide. Do you tell the truth 70 years later and hurt the people who are still alive who are connected to the Mitchell family? Do you expose a crime that happened before most people in this town were even born? Or do you let it stay hidden, like it has been hidden? Margaret looked at the doll again. She looked at the photographs. She looked at the name written on the book, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1950 to 1952. I have to know the rest, she said. I have to know what James saw. I need to hear it directly from him. Harold smiled a very sad smile. I thought you might say that, he said. I have an address. James Whitmore is still alive. He is very old now. He lives in Oregon. And I think he has been waiting 70 years for someone to ask him to tell the truth. Harold wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Margaret. The address was in Bend, Oregon. When you go there, Harold said, tell him that I said it was finally time. Tell him that the horse has been keeping watch all these years. Tell him that someone finally cares enough to listen. Margaret drove for 13 hours straight to reach Oregon. She did not stop for sleep. She did not stop for very long meals. She only stopped for gas and coffee. She had to know. She had to hear the truth from the person who saw it happen. She had to hear it from James Whitmore. The address that Harold had given her was outside of a small town called Bend. The house was old but well kept. There was a large porch with rocking chairs. The land around it was wide and open, with mountains in the distance. There were horses in a field near the house. An old woman answered the door. She was very thin and moved very slowly. She said her name was Patricia. She said she was James's daughter. When Margaret mentioned the Mitchell family and the property in California, Patricia's face changed. Something opened up in her eyes. Something that looked like relief mixed with old sadness. He has been waiting for this, Patricia said. My father has been waiting 70 years for someone to ask him. Come inside. James Whitmore was sitting in a chair by a window. He was looking out at the mountains. He was very old, but his eyes were sharp and clear. When Patricia told him that Margaret was there, that Margaret had found the wagon and the doll in the photographs, James turned away from the window. Tears started running down his face. I knew someone would find it, he said in a voice that was thin but strong. I always knew. I told myself that I did not care anymore. I told myself that I had let it go, but I was lying to myself. I never let it go. I carried it every single day. Margaret sat across from him. She did not speak. She waited for James to tell his story. I was 18 years old, James began. I was a foolish boy. I was working for Thomas Mitchell because I needed money. I wanted to impress a girl who worked in town. I wanted to seem grown up and important. I was stupid. I was young and stupid. He paused and looked at his hands. That morning, Sarah was playing near the yard where the horses were. She was a beautiful child. Everyone loved her. I was supposed to be watching her while Eleanor worked in the house. But Thomas came to me and said he did not need me watching her. He said to go help in the barn. He said to stay busy. He said in a way that made it clear that I should disappear. Jamesy's voice became very quiet. I did not go far. I went to the barn, but I could still see the yard. I could still see the place where Sarah was playing. And I saw Thomas go out to where Sarah was. He picked her up. He carried her toward the old wagon, toward the place where the wagon was parked away from the house. Margaret's hands became cold. I did not think anything bad at first, James continued. I thought maybe he was going to show her something. Maybe he was going to let her see the horse. But then I heard Sarah cry. Not a happy cry, a scared cry. And I heard Thomas say something to her. Something harsh. Something angry. James stopped. He took a shaky breath. I should have run to her, he said. I should have moved. But I was frozen. I was shocked. I did not understand what was happening. And then I heard something else. A sound like a struggle. And then a different sound. A sound like something heavy falling. Margaret felt her heart beating very fast. I ran, James said. I ran as fast as I could. When I got there, I saw Sarah under the wagon. Her face was pale. She was not moving. And Thomas was standing there, and his clothes were torn. His hands were scratched. His face was red. And he was looking at the horse. What do you mean he was looking at the horse? Margaret asked. But someone knew the truth, she said quietly. Someone believed James. Yes, Harold said. Your great-uncle Robert Holloway believed James. Robert was not from a rich family. Robert did not care about power or influence. Robert cared about justice. Robert hired a private person to investigate what really happened. That private person found proof. Evidence. But Robert never told anyone. Robert kept it secret. Why? Margaret asked. Why didn't he tell? Because by that time, Eleanor Mitchell was already breaking apart, Harold said. The woman was dying from grief. She was dying from the loss of her child. If Robert had revealed the truth about Thomas, it would have destroyed Eleanor too. So Robert did the only thing he could do. He bought the original horse that was there that day. The horse that stood over Sarah's body. The horse that nobody could move. And he kept that horse. And he maintained the wagon. And he kept the secret. Margaret suddenly understood. The horse, she said. The horse was a witness. Yes, Harold said. The horse was there when it happened. The horse saw what happened. The horse would not move. The horse stood over the child like it was protecting her, even though it was too late. Your great-uncle kept that horse alive because it was the only witness that mattered. It was the only one that knew the truth and could not be bought or threatened into silence. And now I have to decide what to do, Margaret said. Harold nodded. You have to decide. Do you tell the truth, 70 years later, and hurt the people who are still alive who are connected to the Mitchell family? Do you expose a crime that happened before most people in this town were even born? Or do you let it stay hidden, like it has been hidden? Margaret looked at the doll again. She looked at the photographs. She looked at the name written on the book, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1950 to 1952. I have to know the rest, she said. I have to know what James saw. I need to hear it directly from him. Harold smiled a very sad smile. I thought you might say that, he said. I have an address. James Whitmore is still alive. He is very old now. He lives in Oregon. And I think he has been waiting 70 years for someone to ask him to tell the truth. Harold wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Margaret. The address was in Bend, Oregon. When you go there, Harold said, tell him that I said it was finally time. Tell him that the horse has been keeping watch all these years. Tell him that someone finally cares enough to listen. Margaret returned to California with James Whitmore's words burning in her heart. She had a letter with her. An old letter that James had written in the 1950s, the very day he left town. The letter contained his full written account of what he had seen. The letter that nobody had believed. The letter that he had kept for 70 years, never opening it, never showing it, but unable to destroy it either. It is time, James had said, pressing the letter into Margaret's hands. It is finally time for the truth. The first thing Margaret did was take Grace to the veterinarian. The horse was getting stronger now. The infection in the wound was healing. The horse's ribs were not as sharp. Grace was eating and drinking normally. But Margaret wanted Dr. Patterson to see the horse one more time. When Dr. Patterson saw Grace walking beside Margaret, he smiled. It was a sad smile, but a real one. "She is going to be okay," he said, running his hands along the horse's body. "She is going to live. She kept her vigil and survived. That is more than most creatures get to do." Margaret looked at Grace. She understood now that this horse, and the horse before this horse, had been living monuments to a dead child, living reminders of a truth that nobody wanted to speak. The horse had been keeping watch, waiting for someone to finally care enough to listen. "I'm going to tell the story," Margaret said. "I'm going to make sure that Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell is remembered. I'm going to make sure that James Whitmore is believed." Dr. Patterson nodded. "I've been waiting for someone to say those words for 50 years, he said. "I knew the truth, too. I was there when it happened. I was a younger man then. But I knew, and I said nothing. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of us who said nothing." Margaret contacted the newspaper. She contacted the local television station. She contacted everyone who would listen. She brought the doll, the blanket, the toy horse, and the photographs. She brought James Whitmore's letter. She told the entire story of Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, a child who lived for 2 years, a child who was killed, a child whose death was covered up, a child who was forgotten by everyone except a horse that stood guard over her memory. The story spread. It spread through the town. It spread through the county. It spread across the state. People read about Sarah. People read about the horse. People read about James Whitmore, the boy who told the truth and was destroyed for it. People read about Thomas Mitchell, the man who got away with murder because he had money and power. People read about a whole town that knew and said nothing. And something unexpected happened. The Mitchell family came forward. Not Thomas Mitchell, who had died 50 years earlier. Not Eleanor Mitchell, who had never recovered from her daughter's death. But the descendants of the family. The great-grandchildren of Thomas and Eleanor. They came forward with tears in their eyes, and they said the words that people had been waiting 70 years to hear. "We are sorry," they said. "Our family covered up a terrible crime. Our family protected a man who did something unforgivable. We have known this truth for many years, but we were too afraid to speak. Today, we are speaking. Today, we are acknowledging the truth. Today, we are saying that Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell deserves to be remembered. She deserves justice." Eleanor Mitchell's great-granddaughter, a woman named Carol, made a documentary about what happened. She included James Whitmore's testimony. She included the letter he wrote. She included photographs of the horse. She included the doll and the blanket and all the things that had been left in the wagon. The documentary was shown on television. Thousands of people watched it. Hundreds of thousands of people watched it. And they wept. They wept for Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, a child who never had a chance to grow up. They wept for James Whitmore, a boy who told the truth and was silenced. They wept for Eleanor Mitchell, a mother who died not knowing the real truth about her daughter. They wept for the horse, an animal that had kept a vigil that should never have been necessary. Margaret made the decision to transform the property into something meaningful. She worked with animal organizations. She worked with historical societies. She worked with the Mitchell family. Together, they created the Sarah Mitchell Sanctuary, a place for rescued horses, a place where animals that had been forgotten or hurt could come to heal, a place where the story of Sarah would be remembered forever. The sanctuary had a museum. Inside the museum were all the things from the wagon: the doll, the blanket, the toy horse, the photographs, James Whitmore's letter, the entire story written out clearly so that every visitor would understand, so that every person who came to the sanctuary would know about Sarah, so that Sarah would never be forgotten again. Grace became the symbol of the sanctuary, the horse that had kept watch, the horse that had stood vigil, the horse that had refused to let a child's death be forgotten. People came from all over the world to see Grace. They brought their children. They told them the story. They explained what loyalty and faithfulness meant. They explained that sometimes the most important witness is not a person who speaks with words, but a creature who speaks with presence. James Whitmore lived long enough to see the sanctuary open. He came back to California after 70 years away. He walked through the sanctuary with Margaret. He saw his old hometown with new eyes. The town had changed. It had grown. It had learned. It had finally decided that truth mattered more than silence. At the opening ceremony of the sanctuary, James stood in front of hundreds of people. He held the doll that had belonged to Sarah Mitchell, and he spoke. "I was 18 years old when I told the truth," he said, "and I was destroyed for it. But I never stopped believing that someday, someone would listen. Someday, someone would care. Someday, justice would come, even if it came 70 years late. Today is that day. Today, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell is finally remembered. Today, her death finally means something. Today, the truth finally wins." Grace stood next to him, calm and peaceful. The horse had been cared for. The horse had been healed. The horse had been honored. The horse had become famous. But most importantly, the horse's vigil was finally complete. The truth had been told. The child had been remembered. Justice, though delayed, had finally come. When Grace finally passed away years later, she was buried at the center of the sanctuary, in a place of honor. A plaque was placed at her grave. It read, "Grace, the witness, the keeper of truth, 1987 to 1999. She stood watch so that Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell would never be forgotten. Some truths take a lifetime to tell. Some loyalties transcend the boundaries between life and death. This horse refused to look away, and in the end, neither did we." Children came to read the plaque. Teachers brought their classes to learn about justice and truth. Visitors cried when they understood what the horse had done, what the horse had sacrificed, what the horse had preserved. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, who lived only 2 years, became a symbol of something much larger. She became a symbol of truth, of justice, of the power of refusing to forget. And the horse that had loved her, that had protected her, that had kept watch over her memory, became a symbol of loyalty that could transcend decades, that could change a whole community, that could finally bring justice. The broken wagon was preserved. The doll was protected. The story was told. And every single day, people came to the sanctuary and learned about a child who mattered, a horse who cared, and a truth that was finally, after 70 years of silence, brought into the light. "The vigil has ended," Margaret said at the anniversary ceremony 1 year later. "But the memory will never end." Grace kept watch so that we would remember. Let us all remember. Let us all be like Grace. Let us all refuse to look away from the truth, no matter how long it takes for that truth to finally be spoken. And in the quiet moment that followed, everyone understood. They understood that some stories matter. They understood that some creatures deserve our honor. They understood that justice, though delayed, could still be justice. And they understood that a horse, standing alone in a yard for 70 years, had been more faithful, more true, and more just than all the people in the world who had chosen to remain silent.